Chapter 26. The Sea of Consciousness. The grand sea of consciousness unfolds before me on 5 levels. At the top is a sea of illimitable depth and utter calmness. Below this, and fusing into it, is another mighty sweep, but not so vast in extent. Here there flow great waves in sonorous rhythm. Beneath this is a gulf, and then a third sea possessed of boundaries, though its range is expanding. Here there are many sequences of waves flowing in numerous directions. There are harmonies in parts and blendings, but also there are clashings and some upheavals. Now and then, from out of this sea, there arises with a mighty whirling a column that penetrates through the gulf and occasionally reaches the sea above. Below the third sea, and contiguous to it, there is a fourth sea filled with much agitation. Waves are flowing without harmony or definiteness of direction. There is turmoil everywhere. Finally, at the bottom of all, there is a sluggish sea of no depth, with low powered waves having little meaning or purpose. At the top is the grand sea of infinite consciousness, inexhaustible and without bounds. This is the seeming emptiness that actually is the fullness of the self, pure divinity, the base of all else and the final resolution of all things. The next is the plane of cosmic and transcendental consciousness. Here the one is also a brotherhood. Likewise, permanence stands united with evolution. Below there is a gulf, not easy to cross, a gulf that mankind in its folly has widened with the few dedicated through love, so that mankind strives ceaselessly to bridge the chasm. The third sea is the level of egoistic or subject-object consciousness in its highest state of development, the genuine upper class of egoistic humanity. Here is the consciousness of those who move on the higher levels of love and intellect, but still within the limits of subject-object consciousness. These form the real chosen race. Without them, the gulf would be impassable for the great human mass, and then ultimately all would sink down and out through the sluggish sea of ignorance. Of the human whole, only a handful relatively abides in the third sea, yet they are the immediate sustainers of all civilizations, the real burden bearers of this outer life. From among them also come the recruits that now and then succeed in crossing the gulf. The fourth sea is of the narrow limits, but heavily crowded with a large proportion of humanity. These are the quasi-intellectual, the semi-cultured, the mass that has become conceited with a little knowledge and does not know the saving humility of much knowledge. On this level are the senseless disputations fraught with emotion and passion. This is where the surgeons arise that cause the turmoil of nations and classes. Yet there is some light here, and the energy generated by desire, the latter, to be sure, untrained and poorly directed, but still affording a force that eventually may be harnessed and guided. There still remains much hope for this despite their great folly. The fifth sea, shallow and very constricted, is densely crowded with greatest mass of all. These are the sudden ones, drugged from drinking the final dregs of passion, those who bear little of the burden, but who are themselves the great burden. This sea is murky with the stirred up mud of the depths, so there is only a dim twilight of self-conscious light here. Yet there is a degree of self-consciousness, and so this lower realm does stand above the animal, even though sinking in many respects deep into the animal consciousness, and by this illicit union producing something lower than the animal. Often it seems that the passing of the cycles will not give time enough for these to rise again out of the depths into which they have sunk, for nothing is more hopeless than the task of revitalizing the sodden leaf that has sunk into the bottom of the stream. And with respect to those leaves that have not quite sunk to the bottom, the task is of immense difficulty. It is far easier to transmute active and powerful evil than to arouse consciousness out of the dreamlike trance of suddenness. Yet much may be salvaged, and so long as the spark is not completely extinguished, it is always possible that the flame may be awakened anew. Those of the lowest sea scarcely know that the third sea exists, and are utterly ignorant of the realms beyond the gulf. Hence the denizens of this region frequently turn upon their own leaders, and in their ignorance often destroy the very ones who are their hope. It is better to be the slave of an unkind master, provided the latter is superior, than to be left helplessly alone in the deeps. For a superior man, even though not so great as to have transcended selfishness, when he makes use of an inferior man, however selfish his motive, does raise the latter by the action of an inviolable law. For inasmuch as it is true that when a bird consumes a butterfly, it raises the latter to its own level, so does the superior man raise the inferior by making use of him. Thoroughgoing and intelligent selfishness would never exploit inferiors, but as selfishness nearly always does so exploit, it is therefore made to serve the great end despite itself, but does not share the joy of that service. For any attention given by the superior to an inferior tends to raise the latter towards superiority in some measure. The law invoked here is as inevitable in its action as that related one in the physics, whereby an electric field tends to electrify objects in its vicinity. If ever the effort to remove really superior classes in this world should succeed, then there would soon be left only the lowest or fifth C, with inevitable extinction as its ultimate doom. Who, then, are the real friends of mankind, the levelers or the exalters? A simile comes to mind that quite fairly represents what the leveling process would really mean if successful. Suppose the lithosphere of the earth were all leveled to a common mean. Then there would be no dry land anywhere, but only an ocean of water rolling over all. This would mean no subaerial life on dry land anywhere. There would be no plateaus, and all continents are plateaus, and no mountain peaks. Now, all cultures that we know have developed with dry land as the physical basis of life. So, under our supposition, there could be no development of this. Thus, there could be none of the grand procession of the scaled existences we know, leading up to the exalted consciousness symbolized by the mountain top. And without the ascending ladder of life, there would be no health anywhere to lead on and guide the water-bound existences.